Yeah, I'm at the gym right now. I'll call you back later.
This one is better quality than that one.
Okay, I'll take this one then.
And then just kind of peel it like you would a potato or a carrot.
The rain had not stopped for days. It pounded against the earth with a steady fury, filling streams until they swelled like restless serpents cutting through the land. The storm carried its own voice, a low growl that echoed through the trees and across the rice fields, reminding everyone that nature would not be silenced. Linda pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the soaked soil of her garden, her hands trembling with both cold and determination. The okra plants bent under the weight of water, their leaves heavy, their stalks swaying as though begging to be harvested. She glanced at the woman beside her, and together they bent down, plucking each green pod as though gathering pieces of hope. The air smelled of wet earth, of survival, of quiet endurance. Linda wiped the rain from her face and whispered to herself that this storm too would pass. Though her body knew that storms came and went, but struggles remained. The basket grew heavy in her arms, each okra a fragile treasure pulled from the stubborn soil. Along the way, they passed the swollen stream, its water roaring louder than before, crashing against rocks as if trying to break free of its own path. Linda stopped for a moment, staring at the rushing current, the sound filling her chest like a warning. She thought of her children, of Han at school, of Long waiting for milk, and she knew she had no choice but to keep walking, to keep gathering, to keep moving forward even as the storm grew stronger. The woman beside her spoke softly about the harvest, but Linda's mind was elsewhere, on the weight of responsibility that pressed heavier than the basket she carried. Later that day, Linda carried the okra into the market, her basket balanced carefully, her voice steady as she called out to passers-by. The rain had slowed, but the air still carried its damp chill, the smell of mud clinging to everything. A man approached, curious, his eyes scanning the green pods. He asked for half a kilogram, and Linda's hands moved quickly, weighing the produce, tying the bag with a practiced efficiency. The coins exchanged hands, a small victory, a reminder that every little sale pushed her closer to survival. Another man came, his tone brisk, but not unkind, buying a full kilogram. Linda smiled faintly, her heart beating with gratitude, though her mind calculated how much milk and diapers she could buy with the money. Each transaction was more than business. It was the thin thread holding her life together. A woman approached next, her eyes kind, her words soft. She asked for a kilogram as well, and Linda felt a warmth spread through her chest as she handed over the okra. The woman's smile lingered, and for a moment Linda felt seen, felt acknowledged not just as a seller of vegetables, but as a mother fighting quietly against the weight of the world. She thanked her, bowed slightly, then turned back to her basket, her eyes scanning for the next customer. The market bustled with voices, with haggling, with the rhythm of survival. But for Linda, it was all a blur. Each sale was a heartbeat, each coin a drop of blood that kept her family alive. At home, the world shifted to the cries of her youngest. Long's voice pierced the air. a wail filled with hunger and impatience. Linda rushed to him, her body already moving before her mind could catch up. She scooped him into her arms, rocking him gently, whispering soothing words. She prepared his bottle quickly, explaining softly to the empty air that her own milk had long dried up, that she now relied on powder, on money earned from okra and endless work. She thought of Han, her daughter, at school, learning, growing, unaware of the sacrifices her mother carried. Linda kissed Long's head, breathing in the scent of his soft hair, and whispered promises she prayed she could keep. Her hands moved with precision, mixing formula, shaking the bottle, testing the temperature. She fed Long slowly, watching his small eyes flutter open and closed, his lips latching with desperate hunger. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. She whispered that he must grow strong, that he must never feel the weight of hunger the way she did. As he drank, her own stomach twisted with emptiness, but she ignored it. Her hunger could wait. His could not. When the bottle was empty, she laid him down carefully, humming a tune from her own childhood, one her mother had sung to her long ago. The sound felt like both comfort and curse, a reminder of what had been and what was lost. The day wore on, shadows lengthening as the storm clouds pressed closer once more. A knock at the door startled her, and she turned to see her neighbor entering, his hands carrying a bird cage crafted from wood. The cage gleamed with fresh paint, the smell sharp and clean. He explained it could hold 20 birds, that it was built strong, weatherproof, a gift for her and the children. Linda's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. She touched the wood gently, her fingers tracing the smooth surface, and whispered her thanks. He waved it off, saying it was nothing, but his eyes lingered on her with quiet concern. He showed her the wooden stake he had already hammered into the ground, a place to hang the cage high above the reach of cats or curious hands. Linda smiled, a rare and fragile smile, and for a moment, the heaviness on her shoulders lightened. She asked if he was hungry, her voice tentative, and when he nodded, she offered to cook instant noodles. He laughed softly, saying that was more than enough, that he needed nothing fancy. She turned quickly to the small kitchen, her hands moving with practiced ease, boiling water, breaking noodles, adding the seasoning. The scent rose into the air, filling the room with a warmth that chased away the storm outside. As the noodles cooked, the neighbor worked on the bird cage, perfecting small details, sanding rough edges, ensuring every corner was strong. The sound of his tools mixed with the bubbling of the pot, creating a strange harmony of labor and care. Linda glanced at him, her chest tightening with a feeling she could not name. She returned to her cooking, focusing on the bowl she prepared, careful not to spill, careful to make it perfect though it was only instant noodles. She carried it to the table and set it before him, her eyes watching for his reaction. He ate with quiet gratitude, complimenting her, saying the noodles were delicious. She laughed softly, shaking her head, saying it was nothing. Yet his words lingered, warming her heart more than the steam from the bowl. He offered to feed Long while she ate, and she hesitated, then nodded. Watching him cradle her son, watching him gently guide the bottle to Long's lips, filled her with an ache both tender and sharp. She picked up her chopsticks slowly, tasting the noodles, the flavor simple but sustaining, the act of sharing the meal more precious than the food itself. They talked as they ate, words spilling into the quiet room. She told him she had grown used to living alone, that fear no longer haunted her nights. He listened, nodding, his gaze steady, his presence calm. He asked about Han, offering to pick her up from school, but Linda explained that her mother had already done so. She thanked him for his thoughtfulness, her voice soft but sincere. He smiled faintly, then turned back to his bowl, finishing the last bite with satisfaction. For a brief moment, the storm outside felt far away, as though the walls of the small home had grown strong enough to keep it at bay. Linda leaned back, long asleep in her arms once more, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She looked at the neighbor, at the birdcage, at the simple bowl of noodles now empty, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. It was not relief, not exactly, but something close, something fragile. She whispered her thanks again, and he waved it off, saying he would head home before night grew too dark. She walked him to the door, the rain misting lightly, the air cool and heavy. He promised to return to help again, and she nodded, clutching Long closer to her chest. When the door closed, the silence pressed in once more, but it no longer felt as suffocating. Linda looked around her small home, at the empty bowls, at the birdcage glinting in the corner, at her sleeping son. She whispered to herself that she could endure, that storms would come and go, but she would remain, unbroken, steadfast. Her voice trembled but did not falter. She kissed Long's forehead and whispered to him that tomorrow they would keep going, that tomorrow would bring new struggles, but also new hope. The storm outside roared, but inside, for one night, there was warmth enough to believe in survival. The morning broke gray and heavy, the rain no longer a gentle fall but a relentless curtain that turned the village road into a river of mud. Linda tied her hair back, her hands stiff with cold, her face pale but determined. She carried Long on her hip, his small body wrapped tightly against the chill, while Han clung to her arm, her school bag shielded beneath a plastic cover. The storm mocked her with every step, the wind tearing at her thin clothes, the water seeping into her shoes until each step squelched like a cruel reminder. Yet she pressed forward, her eyes sharp, her body unyielding, whispering promises to her children that they would not drown in this life, that she would carry them no matter how heavy the flood became. At the market, the chaos was worse. The roof of the stalls leaked, water dripping onto baskets of vegetables, the air filled with the cries of vendors fighting against the weather as much as against hunger. Linda set her basket down, her okra shining with fresh rain, her hands raw from the harvest. She called out softly, her voice almost swallowed by the storm, but still customers came. A man purchased a small bag, shaking his head at the storm as though cursing fate itself. A woman with an umbrella paused, buying another kilogram, her kindness a brief light in the gray. Linda's hands moved with steady rhythm, her heart pounding with both gratitude and exhaustion. Each coin that dropped into her pouch was a heartbeat louder than the thunder above. Han tugged at her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide, her voice small against the roar of rain. She whispered that she was cold, that her shoes were soaked. Linda knelt, pulling her daughter close, wrapping the plastic cover tighter, whispering strength into her ears. She told her to endure just a little longer, that the storm would end, that warmth waited at home. Han nodded, though her lips trembled, her small face pale but brave. Linda kissed her forehead quickly, then stood, squaring her shoulders as though the storm itself were an enemy she refused to bow to. She whispered that her children would not be broken, even if she had to bleed herself dry to protect them. By afternoon, the storm had lessened, the rain thinning into mist, the market quieter now. Linda counted her earnings, small but enough to buy powdered milk and rice. She walked to the shop, the coins clinking in her hand, each sound a reminder of the thin line between survival and despair. She purchased the formula, her hands clutching the bag with a grip that trembled not from weakness, but from relief. The shopkeeper gave her a nod, a silent acknowledgement of her struggle, and Linda bowed her head in return. She whispered to herself that her children would eat tonight, and for that alone, she would endure another day. At home, the neighbor appeared again, his footsteps heavy but familiar. He carried wood this time, long pieces stacked across his shoulders, his face lined with effort. Linda opened the door, surprise flickering across her face, and he explained he wanted to repair the fence, to keep the yard safe. She hesitated, then nodded, her heart tight with unspoken gratitude. He set to work immediately, the sound of hammering filling the small yard. each strike of the nail like a promise that the storm could not take everything. Linda watched from the doorway, holding Long in her arms, her eyes soft though her lips remained silent. Han returned from school later, her clothes damp, her shoes muddy, but her face bright as she carried a small notebook filled with drawings. She showed them eagerly, her laughter ringing like a bell in the weary air. Linda knelt to look, her heart swelling as she traced the crude shapes of houses, of people holding hands, of suns breaking through clouds. She asked Han what they meant, and the girl whispered that it was their family, that even if storms came, the sun would always return. Linda's chest ached with both pride and sorrow, her eyes wet as she kissed her daughter's cheek. She whispered that Han's words were true, even if the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. That night, the neighbors stayed for dinner. Simple rice and vegetables shared beneath the flickering light of a single bulb. The air hummed with quiet warmth, the storm outside muffled by walls, patched and mended with care. He asked softly about Linda's struggles, his eyes steady, his voice patient. She spoke cautiously, her words halting, confessing her fears of raising 2 children alone, of money running out, of strength failing. He listened without judgment, nodding slowly, telling her that even wood, though it seemed hard, bent and swayed in storms without breaking. His words settled deep in her chest, as though the timber he worked with each day carried wisdom he had now given to her. After dinner, he offered to cradle Long, rocking him gently, humming a tune that filled the small room with unexpected tenderness. Linda watched, her breath catching at the sight of her son so peaceful in another's arms. Han leaned against her, her eyes heavy with sleep, her body warm and trusting. Linda stroked her daughter's hair, whispering lullabies that mixed with the neighbor's hum, creating a fragile harmony of survival. For a moment, the world outside ceased to matter. The storm, the hunger, the betrayals, all faded before the fragile beauty of a quiet night. But darkness carried its own weight. When the neighbor finally left, the silence felt heavier, pressing against Linda's chest until her breaths came shallow. She walked through the house, her eyes catching on the birdcage still hanging empty, its polished bars gleaming in the dim light. She touched it gently, her fingers brushing over the wood, whispering to herself that one day she would fill it. One day she would bring life and song into it. The cage, though empty, became a promise, a symbol of endurance, of hope caged but not broken. Days passed, the storm fading, the sun returning timidly, the earth steaming as though exhaling relief. Linda worked tirelessly, harvesting, selling, cooking, comforting, her body weary but her eyes never losing their fire. Han skipped to school in brighter clothes, her laughter returning. Long grew stronger, his cries sharper, his tiny hands grasping at his mother's hair with stubborn will. Each small victory fed Linda's spirit, though she never forgot the thin line she walked each day. She whispered to herself constantly, promises of survival, of a future her children would one day inherit. The neighbor visited often, repairing what storms had broken, carving toys from scraps of wood, his presence steady as an anchor. He never asked for thanks, never demanded more than a shared meal or a smile. But his eyes lingered often, his silence heavy with unspoken care. Linda felt it, though she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on her children, on the roof that no longer leaked, on the meals that stretched further with his quiet help. Yet late at night, when the house was silent, she found herself thinking of him, of the steadiness he brought, of the warmth he carried even in silence. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in streaks of crimson, Linda stood outside, holding Long while Han played with a ball nearby. The neighbor approached, carrying a small wooden stool he had crafted. He set it down beside her and sat, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the sky. They spoke little, the silence between them filled with the sound of crickets, with Han's laughter, with Long's soft coos. Linda felt her chest loosen, as though the storm that had lived inside her for so long was finally quieting. She whispered a thank you, her voice barely audible, but he heard, nodding once, his gaze steady on the fading light. That night, as Linda laid her children to sleep, she whispered promises once more, but this time, her voice did not tremble. She told Han that school would bring her dreams closer, that Long would grow strong, that they would not be broken. She kissed their foreheads, pulling the blanket tighter, her heart swelling with both fear and faith. The storm might return, hunger might gnaw again, but tonight she believed in survival, in tomorrow, in the fragile beauty of persistence. The walls around her seemed stronger, the silence kinder, the night less cruel. For the first time in a long time, Linda felt not just endurance, but hope. And so the days pressed forward, each one carved from struggle, each one lit by small sparks of kindness. Linda carried her burdens with unyielding strength, her children clinging to her like roots to soil, her neighbor circling like a steady guardian. The storm would come again. Storms always did. But within the fragile walls of her home, within the fragile fire of her heart, something unbreakable had begun to take root. The night whispered it, the earth hummed it, the future carried it. She was not alone, and she would not fall. The morning sun finally broke through after endless weeks of gray, flooding the yard with golden light that shimmered across puddles like scattered jewels. Linda stood at the doorway, her eyes stinging against the brightness, her arms wrapped around Long as Han skipped barefoot through the wet grass, her laughter ringing like bells in the air. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to every corner of the house, the patched roof, the worn fence, the scarred soil. Linda whispered to herself that they had survived, that every drop of sweat, every coin earned, every night endured had carried them here. The neighbor returned that afternoon, his shoulders carrying not wood this time, but a small bird, delicate and trembling inside a simple cage. He placed it into Linda's hands, his eyes soft, his voice low as he explained it was a gift to bring song into her home. Linda's fingers tightened around the cage, her heart leaping at the fragile creature within. When the bird chirped, tentative but real, it felt like a hymn against silence, a promise that storms did not last forever. Han clapped her hands, squealing with joy, while Long reached out with tiny fingers as though to claim the sound for himself. That night, the family gathered around the bird cage, the neighbor seated quietly among them. The bird sang, its voice weaving through the room, filling the cracks in the walls with a melody brighter than any lamp. Linda closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered to the bird, to the children, to the quiet man beside her, that life was cruel but also kind, that even in the fiercest storms, music could still be born. The bird song answered, steady and defiant, as though agreeing with her vow. As days turned into weeks, the house transformed. The fence stood taller, the walls stronger, the rooms warmer. Han carried her books proudly, her drawings filling the walls, while Long grew heavier in Linda's arms, his laughter sharper, his eyes brighter. The neighbor continued to come, repairing, building, sharing meals, in silence that needed no words. Linda watched him often, her chest tightening with something unspoken, her gratitude too heavy to name. She whispered thanks whenever their eyes met, and he would nod, his smile small but steady, as though understanding more than words could carry. But Linda never forgot the thin line she walked. Each sale at the market, each storm cloud in the distance, each night when money ran short, reminded her that survival was fragile, that tomorrow could still turn cruel. Yet she no longer carried the weight alone. The bird sang, the neighbor helped, her children laughed, and in those sounds she found strength greater than her own. She told herself she could endure. She told herself she would endure. And for once, she truly believed it. On one quiet evening, as the sun melted into crimson and gold, Linda stepped outside with Long in her arms and Han skipping by her side. The neighbor stood at the fence, his tools resting, his gaze turned toward the horizon. Together, they watched the sky burn into darkness. The silence between them filled with the hum of crickets and the faint song of the bird inside. Linda whispered that she was no longer afraid of storms, and the words hung in the air like a spell. The neighbor turned, his eyes steady, and simply nodded as though sealing her vow with his silence. And so the story closed, not with triumph shouted into the sky, but with quiet endurance etched into the soil. Linda, the mother who had carried her children through storms, stood unbroken. Han dreamed bigger with each page she turned. Long grew stronger with each day he laughed. And the neighbor remained a steady presence, a shadow that had turned into light. The storm would come again. Storms always did. But now there was song in the house, laughter in the yard, and hope in her heart. And that was enough to face whatever tomorrow carried.